going on, gentlemen? Thank you for joining me on Question the Rules. It's a pleasure to have each of you here to talk about fatherhood.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much. So I think I want to start off this conversation with your fathers and kind of talk about the lineage that you came from. So John, why don't you just kick us off and give us a sense of what your father was like and what you learned about fatherhood or about being a man from him?
Yeah, well, most of the men in my lineage were lost. I come from a long line of hard-drinking Irish, Scotch alcoholics, and my father was no different. And he left when I was 18 months old, and it really has been that way his whole life. So, the masculine imprint I got was one of absence and one of kind of floating in and out. And he's kind of continued being lost most of his life, but I did learn a lot from him about how to be an entrepreneur, how to start your own business, how to go for a dream. There was a period of time where him and I were really connected, and it was mainly around business. And so most of the success I've had in business, I really appreciate that. But in terms of those first years, I was all women.
Yeah.
I was around all women, yeah.
What kind of rules did he try and impart onto you, or did you feel like we're there?
None. There was no structure.
None.
None, yeah, virtually no structure. Which I think was I think as I got older, I realized like that was one of the things that I really missed, I really craved, I really grieved, actually not having a father who would teach me the structure of discipline, who would teach me what it meant to actually have, follow through on a goal, to punch through a goal, that kind of thing. I really had to learn that on my own with men's groups, which I've been involved with for a long time. So I had to craft that later. But no, I didn't get that from him. And
yeah. So you learned how to be a father from other men.
I learned how to be a father from other fathers.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about yourself, Hector?
Oh man, my father was great. He was dope. He's a Harlem native, New Yorker, and loved jazz, ex-Marine, so very disciplined, which is something I carry with me to this day. I like a system. I like being disciplined. So very loving, very caring, but I would probably say towards the teenage years was in and out and passed from cancer. So then that's when I looked, obviously, just like John, towards other male figures to kind of guide me.
How old were you roughly when he passed away?
Probably about 12, 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, so around the peak time, right? For me to figure things out and start my journey as a man. And that, even though also just like John, raised by a family of women, which was great, but it wasn't the same. So I went and found my male role models in the streets of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that before your father passed away that you felt like you were learning from him?
Man, like arts, music. He liked live music. He liked musicians. Very old school. My entire family and upbringing is very traditional, old school, and they cared about home. But Marines at that time, they dealt with a lot. Our servicemen, period.
Yeah.
So it was probably a tough transition for him also. And before becoming ill and passing was kind of like in and out and probably dealing with his own stuff. But I would say for the most part, he just instilled how important it was for me to be disciplined growing up and how to take care of my family.
So when you started to look elsewhere for other male figures, where did you look? You said in the streets.
I mean, yeah, I was in the streets because my mom ended up years later also passing from cancer. So obviously the role models changed, right? It was a very rough time in New York City, and especially even more so Brooklyn. I grew up in a crack epidemic. So my role models changed, right? My role models became people that had to survive by all means necessary, which also, not only did I gravitate toward, but I was able to do well because discipline is part of that.
Yeah. So looking back after your father had passed away, what did you feel was missing from?
No structure,
Yeah.
no structure, no support system. And, you just like learning on the fly which is like super dangerous because like any day will be your last.
Yeah. So the people that you were hanging out with and spending time with, did they change too?
Did they change?
Yeah.
Like how? Meaning like my group of peers?
Yeah.
I mean, compared to family, yes. I think growing up poor and with like a lack of resources, you kind of think they're family, or you kind of accept them as family, but they're not. It's like crabs in a barrel, right?
Yeah.
Like receiving these male figures in the streets as family is like a facade. It's like that to keep you pushing to the next level, to keep getting more from you, and it's like a game of bloodsuckers, right? And whoever survives in the end wins. So now that I'm an adult, like yeah, it was sad, but I was just lost for the most part.
Were you able to talk to those guys? Like after your father passed away, what was that like?
A lot of youth growing up with less, they don't really have many people. That's the problem. They don't have people to talk to. So that's why you just like get into whatever can manipulate you at the time, or whatever can like feed your needs. If you need money, you need food, you need clothing. You seek to whatever can help facilitate that. And like you trick yourself into believing they're family.
Yeah.
For the most part. But like we didn't growing up back in the days, we didn't have nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to survive. The entire, if anybody looked at old pictures of New York City, everything looked burnt down and boarded up. It was like the Gaza, seriously. Like it was like crazy.
Yeah. So what kind of crowd did you fall into? What filled up that time? What filled up that space for your family?
Men and women trying to hustle, narcotics, drug trafficking, for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, man.
No doubt.
Elliott, what about you?
My father,
Yeah.
he grew up in the jungle. He's a wild man, didn't wear shoes. Whatever he ate was what he caught or what he picked. Really didn't have any parents or guidance because there was 12 of them, children. They all parented themselves out in the jungle. And so when he came to America, it was like first of all, he didn't have any like schooling. He wasn't like conditioned or trained to be good boys the way we are.
Yeah.
He lived by the law of the jungle, which is alpha male rules. And when he came to America, we were here. He moved here to Brooklyn. He and my mother, they met here, and it was a totally different kind of jungle. But because he had that work ethic, because if you don't work, you don't eat in the jungle, he figured out very quickly here in Brooklyn that I got to figure out a trade. And he's a very disciplined, very focused, very committed man. So he was able to learn how to fix cars. And then raised his family. He's one of 12 originally, and he was the only one to make it out of Brooklyn. And he decided, "No, I'm not raising my family here." He wanted to. He's high-minded, they would call him, and he wanted to raise his family in Long Island, where the white people lived. He's like, "I want this big house over here. I ain't living over there." So he and my mother broke their butts to make that happen for us. And he was a strong alpha male leader in the home, but also deeply emotional, very instinctual, the way he raised us and was with us.
What qualities would you say made him that alpha male figure?
the boundaries, the discipline. We couldn't get away with anything, you know, and he was committed to, he would always say, I want you to be better than me. You know, being first generation American, you know, my mother would always say that they would grow up thinking that America had streets of gold. So it's like you come here and you gotta tighten up, you gotta do the right thing, you gotta get along. So to them, that was like the most important thing. It's like you gotta go to school, my father was not about getting A's, he was like, he was settled for C's. He's like, you just gotta do good enough. Just get through it, but you have to get an education. And that was his whole thing.
Interesting. So what would you say were the rules that he set for you as a young boy, as a young man?
Well, respect is one of them, you know, speak to me and speak to your mother with respect. You know, it's funny how, and even back in the 80s when I was a kid growing up, he would marvel at the fact that children would speak to their parents like they're their friends, or like, you know, you know, not having respect. Even like a lot of my friends would come over, you know, and my father would be like, what's this kid? He doesn't say hello to people when he walks in the house. Who, you know, so like manners was super important. But it wasn't a matter of having a lot of rules. It was like a couple basic rules that were constantly reiterated.
Yeah, interesting. What about you guys? What do you feel like the rules were that maybe were there or maybe not there?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were talking. I think the rule that my father gave me non-verbally was learn how to make people like you. Like learn how to be liked, it was kind of a hustle, but it was more about like, be somebody that people want to be around. And he was really good at that, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about you?
Same, manners was like top notch, period. You had to hold doors open for people that were older than you, like whether man or female. Like you had to that was mandatory. Like you had to take your hat off indoors. People don't do that no more.
Yeah.
People have their hats on in restaurants. Yeah. Like you had to do it.
Yeah.
And that was that's how I was raised.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What pressure do you feel like your fathers had on them that might be different from us today?
The pressures that we have are so much more than my father had. Like I said, he didn't grow up with American media. He didn't grow up in American schools. He didn't grow up living next to the Joneses.
Which country?
Belize.
Okay.
Yeah. So the pressures that he had was, am I gonna have clean water today? Am I gonna be able to catch something or pick something to eat? So there were much more primal challenges, much more basic.
Yeah.
I think guys growing up in the 70s or men who were fathers in the late 60s and early 70s had the pressure of the cultural shift, like what it means. There was a whole discussion about what it means to be a man. Now, in that time, it became about expression, it became about freedom, it became like following sexual freedom and all of that. So I think that the pressures my dad had was like how to be me.
Yeah.
Right, how to shed the, what the 50s archetypal male was and how to be me. And I think, that had its benefits. There was a lot of artistic growth and a lot of, being an artist was one of his rules, like be an artist. Or,
Interesting.
Really respect the arts. That's one of the things I'm really grateful that he gave me.
How do you feel like your father's leadership made you who you are today? Like what parts of you would you attribute to his parenting and his leadership?
I would probably say my love and respect for cultures.
How so?
Because he grew up in the jazz era.
Yeah.
So he grew up with a lot of history, and he traveled the world as a Marine. So that was like, anybody could come in our doors.
Yeah.
I didn't, even though part of my family, they grew up in Bensonhurst, right? So if anybody knows what Bensonhurst is, back in the day, super racial tension, this, that, but still I come from because of him and other people in my family and other men in my family, anybody could walk in our doors and get a plate. So that's how I was raised, and that's how I still carry on with my life and my kids and my family and friends.
Yeah.
My dad really liked adventure, and he did take us on trips. Like he spent a lot of time in Mexico. He started a business in Mexico when I was 13, he took my sister and I down to Oaxaca, which was kind of a wild place, and so we spent a lot of time there. And he started a business in a village outside of Oaxaca. So I think that the things that he taught me, he didn't really mean to. They were just sort of imparted as he was trying to make it happen. But he was a hustler, and he taught me kind of how to hustle and how to go for it. Like how to, okay, you have something, go for it. He traveled around the Southwest selling rugs out of a checker cab, and ended up on a porch in Santa Fe and created a really successful business from doing that. So I was like, all right, like that's the model of entrepreneurial spirit. All right, fuck that, I can do that. Yeah, and I think that some of the things he taught me, I really, really value.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I'm jealous of all the structure. I gotta say, like having that much structure from your father, I
resented it.
Yeah.
I didn't like it.
At the time.
I imagine.
Yeah.
I wanted.
But now you can see.
I ran away a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But as an adult,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
see the value now.
For sure.
Yeah, I think like I grew up in, I think I was saying this before, I had like 2 dads and 2 moms. And so I had a dad and a stepdad and a mom and stepmom. And my dad and my stepdad are fundamentally different. Like they're just polar opposites. One's like the creative, into singing, into like classical music, and into like these softer skills, all about connecting with people and making sure everyone, his thing is fairness, right? So making sure everyone loves you through fairness. And my stepdad was more like the assertive, dominant, order, structure. You go to practice, you get up at 5 a.m., go to hockey, and man, I fucking hated that. Like, I remember as a kid, I was just like, and I think it made it even worse because he was my stepdad, right? Like, if he was my biological father, there still would have been tension, but because he was my stepfather, it was just like, I bucked against that so hard. So where did you guys find yourself, like, locking horns with your dad? Like, how did that show up?
It was much later for me. And I think it was a result of just the wound of him not being there, and then all of a sudden being there and wanting me to be a part of his business and a part of what he was building. I think I just had all this unprocessed anger at him not being around. So I made life hard on him, even though I was a big part of, we were together a lot for a few years there.
Yeah.
And, but I didn't even know I was punishing him, but I definitely was challenging him, punishing him. Yeah.
Interesting.
Early on, I was just, any time with him, I was hungry for any time with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and then later on when he wanted it was like, screw you.
Yeah, I guess like a lot of guys who grew up with absent fathers, there's this sort of hole in your heart around your dad not being there. And so when he gives you anything, any kind of attention, you're just like, oh, what do I need to do to get more of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Elliott, what are your thoughts?
On
Just some of the times where you guys would butt heads and lock horns.
It was always about school. I hated school. He was adamant that, because he didn't go to school, so he was adamant that you go to school and you finish school. So like anytime I got a call from a teacher or got suspended or got in detention, one time I got caught like faking my report card. Yeah, I did. School was not my thing, and so he would ground me a lot. He would punish me a lot. One time when I was about 13, 14 years old, what did I get? I think I got in trouble for, I don't know, something. But I ended up in the basement underneath the stairs. He was like, all right, so my punishment was you don't get a bedroom anymore. That's a privilege. So I ended up in the basement underneath the stairs, and like I was telling you before, it's probably one of the best things because it was about the same time that he bought me a barbell set. So I would hang out in my dungeon, they would say, just lifting,
So good. I like how sometimes when we get disciplined, it actually is the type of like practice that we need to start embarking on, as young men. I think one of the interesting things that we talked about just before we came on was about initiation. And I'm curious if any of you went through some form of initiation. Maybe I'll start with you.
Well, I think we are all going through initiations, but whether or not we're conscious of it is really the big difference. Whether or not there's conscious attention being paid to what's going on in an individual's life. I would say that for me personally, sports, football, I was initiated through iron, lifting and being with a band of brothers, having the elder as a coach. I think football was indispensable for me in my life and coming into contact with what it means to be a man,
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Hector, I know that you, from what we've talked about, you joined a gang and you were starting to deal, like, was there an initiation practice there? I know that sometimes there is initiation in those spaces.
No, I'd say my initiation to being a man and growing up was probably through prison. Yeah, not even so much the streets, but definitely being surrounded by thousands of people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different cultures. As a kid, being in there with grown men. Yeah.
How old were you when you got sent to prison?
I got indicted at 23.
Okay. For?
Drug trafficking, distribution.
Okay. What would you say got you to that space? Like, what led you down that path where?
It's like that hero's journey, right? It's like when you hit a dark place, it's like you either starve or you make a move. And I decided to leave school early. And anything I do, I'm like 100% in. And I dove into the streets. Always was great at managing teams. Always was great at mathematics and sales. And having the wrong product, set me away for a very long time. So that dark moment, right, is when I was forced to wake up. So that was my moment of truth, so to speak.
What was it like to have to reconnect with your son, and did you feel pressure to do right by your family? Because I know a lot of people that come out, they want to be able to reconnect. What was that process like?
Not so much pressure, but definitely wanted to show my commitment to doing the right thing, rebuilding my bond with my family, loved ones, friends, and wanting him to feel secure.
Yeah.
That I'm not going nowhere anytime soon. So with that, he, and of course being a child, it was totally on board. He wasn't rebellious, which I'm super grateful for. And I was just received. It was just love.
What was one of the challenges as you reintegrated into your family and into your community?
Challenges, great question. The balance between family and business. So my first 4 years home, I didn't take a day off, and I would tell everybody there's no family time until I'm done with work. So that was tough, but things are fine now.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
John, how old were you when you became a father?
31.
31?
Yeah, 31.
Okay.
And I'd say that was my initiation to, kind of growing up. I'd been a kind of a child for most of my teens and 20s, and when Claire came, it really made an impact, and I got clear that I had to take care of this little girl, and I was also kind of, I didn't want to be the father that my father was. I was newly sober, and I wanted to do the right thing, and I wanted to be there, and so that's when I hooked up with a group of men that were good fathers, that showed up, that had good relationships, and I really just hung on their coattails and said, show me how to do this, because I don't know. No one ever did this for me, so I don't know how to show up.
Yeah, what was the wake up factor for you? I hear a lot of dads, a lot of men that become fathers, it's like, oh, I just couldn't describe what it was like, but I feel like I woke up. I feel like a part of me woke up.
There's a primal thing that happens when you have this little, totally vulnerable being that is completely reliant on you.
Yeah.
And for me, watching, what Claire had to go through in literally right when she came out, just awoke something very deep in me that I have a chance to actually change the lineage of my family, right? Of neglect and absenteeism and all that. And I can be the guy this can stop here with her.
Yeah.
And I was really clear that's what I wanted to do.
Can you describe more, or just go into a little bit more detail about some of the challenges that she faced?
Yeah, she was born with cystic fibrosis, and so she had, chronic lung problems all through her life, and spent about a third of her life in the hospital, and so a lot of our time together was time in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I spent, for a good 20 years, I spent, a third of the year sleeping in a hospital bed. And that was my, sadhana. That was my challenge, to show up and be there and support her and make it fun and make sure that she was never alone or she never felt alone. And so I'm so grateful for it, because I think if I wouldn't have had that kind of challenge in fatherhood, I might have kind of just slipped into mediocrity. But I was called to take care of this little girl, and her mom as well, of course. But it really, I think I needed that kind of responsibility to rise up as best I could.
Yeah. How did you, first off, how did you manage, once you found out that she had cystic fibrosis, and that you were going to be entering into that role of more caretaking? What was that process like for you?
Well, she had, for a long time, she had a normal life in a lot of ways, right? CF gets progressive, and and her life was spectacular. Her life was really spectacular. But I think that I guess I just had to be there to make sure that I could give her structure, because she had a lot of meds to do and a lot of processes to do and a lot of breathing treatments to do. And there's a lot of management, and I had to be there and kind of enforce care, because when you're 7, you don't want to stop playing and then do a hour-long breathing treatment. So there was a lot of that, and I just really had to show up and be committed to her care, and also create, stopping what I was doing. At the time I was in grad school, and I knew I couldn't support her in grad school, so I had to start my own business and take care of my family, like you talked about. Everything became about making sure she was taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because I think one of the challenges that we see with some men today is where they find purpose. And there seems to be this question for some men of, can they find some purpose? Maybe not all the purpose, but can they find purpose in fatherhood? So
Totally.
what's your take on that?
I completely did. I felt, no matter what was going on in my life, starting a business or whatever I was doing in my life, I felt most on purpose when I was taking care of Claire. When she was taken care of, when everything was set up, and if it wasn't, I was like a laser focused. Okay, what needs to happen now for it to happen? And I think, again, I consider that a blessing. But in my 30s, my purpose was definitely taking care of my daughter. Yeah, for sure.
Incredible. Yeah. Elliott, what do you think about that? You talk a lot about fatherhood and becoming men and purpose. So what's your take on finding purpose in parenting and fatherhood?
I find myself as the father of 4. I've got 3 daughters and a son. But I also find myself as the father figure to upwards to 1 million or more young men in the world. And so once I realized that I am a father to that magnitude, then all of my actions and all of my thoughts, all of my behaviors, all of my hopes and ambitions shifted towards generativity and thinking in terms of generational blessings and what kind of impact are the words and ways that I contribute to the world today going to be for my children's children, grandchildren, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So how did become a father change you? Or did you notice any change or shift in how you showed up?
No, I didn't change. I just got intensified. So I'm like committed, devoted, hardworking. I mean, those were the traits that my father instilled in us. Get up and work hard every day. I mean, be devoted to your family, be devoted to your work, do the best that you can. When we started having children, and mind you, we had tons of debt. We both went to college. We had college debt, $90,000 in credit card debt. There was a time where we had to have conversations about turning the lights off. Things were challenging, but I kind of thrived in that because it just made me work harder in my business and put in more hours and have bigger goals. And so it just caused me to hustle. I like when that fire's under my ass and I got a reason to go hard.
Yeah, so your kids provided somewhat of like more incentive, more of like that sharpening the axe. Yeah, interesting.
That was my experience as well.
Yeah?
Like having somebody a life that you are really in charge of, it lit a fire under my ass that I don't think would have been there if I didn't have that little one depending on me.
Yeah. Hector?
Yeah, I mean, when my son was born, I mean, found many ways to, go harder, generate more. I wanted his mom to help take care of him as well and not have any burdens or pressures. So she stayed home for the first couple of years and I took care of everything. But yeah, it definitely lights that fire, right?
I like you mentioned that too, man, that I wanted her mom to be home for the first 4 or 5 years. I think that's important. Yeah.
Same here, that was our commitment.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if we had to live hand to mouth. It was more important that the children had their mother with them.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that? Like, why do you think that's so important? Because I think that there is a counterculture that has arisen to that now and having like more caretakers around to support the child. So can you just speak more to why you think that's important?
Well, I think it's if the woman wants that, right? And in Melissa's case, she wanted to be a mother. Like she wanted to be there. There's no place else she would have rather been. So if she would have had to go to work, it would have been a travesty. Obviously, if a woman wants that life and wants to have a career, and great. But in Melissa's case, she wanted that, and I wanted to support that. And so I was like, I'll make the money. You just stay home, take care of Claire, and that helped kind of inspire me.
Yeah, same. My son's mother wanted to spend the first year or two with him and with Hector. And a few years later, she ended up going back to work. I mean, she wanted to have that experience, that full-time experience as a mother. I mean, I wasn't going to deny her that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, that was our commitment. The moment we knew that she was pregnant, she was earning more money than me. But we decided that it would be better for her to stay home. She wanted to. I wanted to. I think there's a sense of dignity that a man has when he knows that he's the sole provider. I think there's something strong about that sense also, that I can provide so that my woman can do what she does best, which is to nurture and to provide for the, take care of the child. She would do a better job than me. I wouldn't be a good stay-at-home dad. And not as good as she would be as a mother. So to know that I can create that walled garden, create that space, makes me feel good.
Thoughts on, this is probably gonna get pretty real, but thoughts on the men that do wanna just stay at home and just be stay-at-home dads.
To each his own.
Yeah. God bless them if they're built that way. I'm not built that way. I don't think I think if they want that and it feels good to them, great. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I feel more useful in the grind.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, because I think there's a good piece of like honoring that. Just like honoring what's true for you, as you're saying. Like if that's what's like really real for you, then. But
I did get a lot of joy out of taking care. Right? So I found as much time as I could in between working and doing my thing to show up, and there's a lot of joy in actually the physical piece of taking care of a child, of putting a child to bed, to making food for a kid.
Yeah, I did all that.
That's joy right there.
My son would only eat and get clothed and only for me.
Yeah.
So they would always come get me. Can you do me a favor? Can you feed him? Can you get him dressed? Get him to school because he's flipping out. So it was great.
What do you think are the important pieces that we as fathers need to make sure that we do Like we talked about nurturing there. How do you see a father nurturing? What are some of the other things that you think
Yo,
for
that's
you as fathers
important.
important?
Back in the days, you say you can't cry, you can't do this. Yo, show the love, man. Give the love. Teach your kids love. Teach your kids the importance of love. Letting them know crying is fine. Letting them know how to express themselves. Back in the days growing up, dads used to always want you to be tough. Fuck tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be human.
Yeah, be human. I found that, I had a conversation when Claire was 16 and I got really clear that my purpose was going to shift from her. I felt it really important that I sit down with her and go, you know what, baby, I love you, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm going to start spending more and more of my time on this thing that I feel really passionate about. And we had this very kind of adult conversation about it, and she loved it. And so when I left town, even when she was in the hospital and I had to leave town and go teach or do what I do, she supported it. And I think that was, I felt like that was an important lesson to give her, that I could, even not being there, me giving whatever gift I thought I had for the world was an inspiration for her, and she still felt held. And I think communication is a big piece of fatherhood for me. And also, I'm so glad that I gave her I showed her my spirituality. Like what I would meditate. I'm a Buddhist, so she would be on my lap and I'd be meditating or chanting. And I didn't care whether she did the same thing. I just wanted her to have some sensitivity for the divine and some sense of the divine. And
That was like your version of taking her to church,
Yeah. I would take her, and she grew to have her own relationship with it, but I wanted her to feel my love of, the divine sincerely, and I think that was helpful for her. Comforted her.
Yeah, it's incredible. I like that. Elliott, what about yourself? What do you think are the important pieces that you try and teach your kids?
I think in terms of, protect and provide, and the word protect, you conjure up visions of, carrying a sword or a shotgun and protecting your family that way, which, we don't really need to protect ourselves in that way anymore, but the protection against bad ideas and cultural bad ideas and media bad ideas. And so the protection is more about protecting their soul from bad ideas that this world is getting really good at perpetrating and pushing on us.
What do you think are some of those bad ideas you try and protect your kids from?
I used to be very liberal in my ideas, like anything goes, YOLO, gray area, everything's all right, just be a nice person. And I realized very quickly when my children started getting older, closer to teenage, that I couldn't do that anymore because it didn't provide them with a sense of stability for where my parents stand. I don't think if the parents take a stand, the children know what to believe because they got the school, they got the media, they got their friends telling them all kinds of different things. Even if I'm wrong, it's better that I make a stance. That way, at least you know where your father stands, you know where your mother stands.
In the path.
Right.
Creating structure for them to
I
relax into.
can't make them not have premarital sex or to get involved in worldly things. I can't make that happen. But I think it's very important that we state our values. Be very clear. This is what I value. This is what I don't value. This is what I would rather you do. This is what I rather you don't do. I think a lot of parents don't make those boundary calls, and I think that's a big mistake.
I think there's a lot of laziness I see around that, and an unwillingness to actually a worry that you're going to make your kids mad at you or they're going to be pissed at you or whatever. And I think in the difficult conversations I had to have with Claire, if I wrapped it in the I am not being a good dad if I don't step in and tell you how I feel, I am doing you a disservice as your father. And even if you disagree with me, I'm going to tell you why this is important. But having that conviction made a huge difference. It actually made her feel safe.
Yeah, I believe in setting the tone, man.
Yeah.
Set the tone, period.
What were some of the tough conversations that you've had to have with your kids? So I know that each of you have your own, challenges that you've had to have those conversations. So can you give me an example?
I had to have a very difficult conversation with her around being independent. You know, like she needed a lot of care, and she wanted to be independent when she got to be 18. So I helped her get her own place. You know, her mother and I actually disagreed on this, and I said, look, I want you to have the experience of having a roommate and being young and doing that, and I helped to create that with her, and I think that was a really difficult decision on my part, you know, and it made it hard on her. It was harder on her to take care of herself, but she wanted that, and I had to have conversations with her about creating structure and self-care if that's what she wanted. And I almost had to pull the plug a couple times. Like, look, if you're not taking care of yourself, then I'm not gonna be paying your rent, and you're gonna have to go live with your mom, because I would be doing you a disservice as your father if I just let this slide. You know, it wasn't a very happy conversation, but I'm glad I had it. You know?
That's why we have fathers to do that. Have those tough conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like do you feel like her illness in some ways was supportive of you having to dig in more sometimes and like be more protective in that area?
Well, certainly I was, and I was definitely guilty of crossing the line, right? And my fear of losing her sometimes made me a little too rigid or a little too protective, and we had to work that out. We had some difficult conversations. We had a 2-hour conversation where I just said, okay, baby, anything you're mad at me about, I'm game for listening. And I reflected it back. All right, that makes sense. What else you got? And and she had a whole bunch. It was one of the toughest conversations I've ever been a part of. And yeah, but I think that her illness, made being a dad, just gave it a little extra challenge.
How did you work with her to make the decision? I know that when she decided to have the transplant, that must have been a really challenging conversation to embark on with her.
Well, she came to me when she was 19 and said, I'm off the transplant list, I don't want it.
Okay.
And part of what I had to do as a father, that I pushed as hard as I could, and then I was like, okay, baby, like I had to accept.
Why were you pushing?
Because I felt it was the right thing to do. And I wanted her to have a chance earlier on than she actually did to get new lungs, because I think it would have been helpful for her. But it's her body. She said, Dad, this is my body, it's my decision. I'm 19, like you can either be with me or not. And I was like, all right, baby, I let it go.
Yeah.
And then a year later, after she realized that things were getting worse for her and she wanted to live, she changed her mind and got back on the lung transplant list.
Yeah, I mean, those are real life conversations.
It was hard to accept, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And to just be loving and supportive of what she wanted to do, and then not, while my heart was kind of broken and while I was watching her get sicker, that was hard, man. That was a hard thing for me to do.
I know that Claire was pretty public towards the end of like her journey, and she really was outspoken in so many beautiful ways. I mean, I remember watching one of her videos and like sharing it with my wife and just being like, man, like I hope that we raise kids as beautiful as her.
Thank you.
She really was special.
Thank you.
And I'm curious if you can share a little bit more with us about what it's like to be a father who has lost a child, because I think it's something that many men struggle with silently and don't really know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah.
The way it's worked for me is I honor the grief. I created space in my life to grieve. I honor it when it comes, When it comes, I give it its due.
Yeah.
I surrender to it. I try to make art with it when I can. I'll write about it a lot. I'm a writer, so I'll write a lot about it. But I basically I let it take me for a few moments, And usually sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's half a day. I just gave it space, and that's, it's been about 8 months since she's passed, so it's better, but it just fucking blindsides me sometimes, and I just have to surrender.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, because I know it's, whether we lose parents or partners or children, grief is something that I see a lot of men struggling with. I'm sure that you do too in the work that you do with them.
Yeah, what they don't tell you is that it's like there's a hole in your heart that never quite heals, and so there's just an ache that You know, because she was so popular, there's Facebook videos that pop up every other day, or pictures, or there's new events with her name. There's a documentary coming out in a couple. So she's not going anywhere. Her online presence is not going anywhere. So I just have to be with the pain when it comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heal with it. Thank you. Gentlemen, so as fathers, I think I want to just shift a little bit to some of the questions, some of the challenges that you see modern fathers dealing with. You mentioned media and some of the bombardment that there seems to be. What rules do you see being put on fathers today? What challenges do you see modern fathers facing today? Maybe I'll just start with you, Elliott.
There's a lot of confusion about who's who in the home with mom and dad. And we got a lot of dads that behave more like one of the children with the wife, and women being the dad and the mom, even if there's a father in the house. And when there isn't a father in the house, we have a government that gives prizes to women to not have the father in the house. As far as media and what we're told about fatherhood and how to be a father, we've got Homer Simpson and, most weak, fat, dumb dads as our examples.
Peter Griffin.
Right. So the challenge is that there's very little strong father energy, and the women are having to pick up the pieces in that way. And in another way, they kind of fought for it. And then nobody's happy, nobody's satisfied, because men don't get to stand in their place. Women are frustrated with weak men, and children they don't have the boundaries or the leadership in their home either. So it's a crisis.
Yeah. Hector, thoughts? John?
I only speak from experience in the past, and I kind of agree, but more so about just how this government just attacks fathers of color, separates families. That's the only thing I can relate to and understand and see, because that's the community I come from. Cops and government just tearing up families of color, period. You get rid of the father, there's no structure. That's what I'm used to, and that's what I still see to this day. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because if you look at a lot of the research that's being done on, runaways and kids that drop out of school, and even so far as looking at like the population of men that, are unfortunately become rapists, the majority of them, large majority of them, are coming from fatherless homes.
Absolutely.
Large majority, right? So like 75% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, right? So it's like, it very clearly links back to the role of fathers. So when you look at fatherless homes, how do you classify that? Because I think that some people, we look at it and we're like, oh, it's just when the dad has taken off or isn't there, or there's separation. So how do you define a fatherless home? What would that actually look like?
Well, I think that you can have a home with the father there and the father's not present. To your previous question about some of the rules that men are against, I think fathers have a number of challenges, right? They're meant to support her career in a lot of ways. They're also meant to be absolutely present as fathers, and they're meant to. There's expectations about them having their own purpose, right? So they have to have their own purpose, they have to support her purpose, and they have to be completely present as not just fathers, but lovers, right? You hear this a lot. And so I think the pressure on men as husbands and fathers is greater than it's ever been. And it's the myth of the good husband, that you just had to show up and be a provider and a good dad, and it was good, you were good. Now there's a lot more that men are expected to show up and be a part of, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on the men that I see in a lot of other ways to be everything. So to me, I feel that's an important pressure that men are trying to navigate. Like, how do I be the man that she can trust to lead her right? And also live my purpose fully, and also show up and teach my children properly and instill my values. It's a big order. It's a big order for men.
Do you guys see that pressure as well? You see that same thing?
Not so much, man. Women are leaders, just like men are. I mean, I want to be matched with a leader. I'm a leader. I don't need nobody to follow me. I don't need nobody that I got to always hold your hand. I want somebody by my side, not behind me. You know?
Do you think that people can lead together, though?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I'm all about teams. And women, just as strong as anybody else.
Well, no, I'm not implying that they're not, man.
No, for
I'm
sure.
just saying this, that from women, they also expect that the men to lead in relationship and as a father, and if they're not, there's
Some
a lot
do.
of,
Yeah,
some do,
some
I guess
do.
you're right, some probably
Some
don't,
do.
but I hear it a lot. It just feels like, it feels like more pressure than men have had to be a lot more than they had to be 20, 30, 40 years ago.
I agree.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about in dating and in the porn episode was consent. And this seems to be a huge topic right now. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion as fathers. Like, how would you have that conversation? How would you have a conversation about porn or sex, which seems to be running rampant? How do you have a conversation with your children around consent? What does that look like for you? So I'll let you pick which one you kind of want to talk on, and maybe just give some insight into that. So John, do you want to maybe start?
Yeah, on consent, I would, if I had a son, I would teach my son to feel her, like to really pay exquisite attention to her and not assume that she's going to be able to say no if she's a no, but to feel like she might not say anything but she might get tense. That's a no, right? So the nonverbal cues, teaching men to pick up on nonverbal cues of consent rather than just putting all the pressure on her to say no, which is difficult for a lot of women, I think is crucial. And I would ask them to really, and then if she does say no, it's not the time to obviously to try to convince her. It's like to honor it, and enjoy it. Like enjoy her no. That means she's telling you that there's something that you're not doing yet, and there's something she hasn't. She's not okay with it yet, which is actually a gift for you to check, like, what are my motives? And, am I being conscious? And am I being attentive? And it's actually a beautiful challenge. Yeah.
Elliott, what are your thoughts as a father of 3 daughters and 1 boy?
So I think of my daughters first because my son's only 8. And I tell them that I think it is best for them to wait till they're married to have sex. It's better not to be getting involved. I even tell the young men that I deal with, it's better not to be getting involved with sex at an early age and being promiscuous. I don't think promiscuous behavior is healthy for men or women. It gets us to be very addicted to the sensuality, the feeling. We were talking about with the guys that were porn addicts. Well, it's just like being a crack addict. It's this feeling. And we often confuse that lust, that sensation, that need for release with love. And then we project that sensation on, especially when you're young, you project that sensation on the young lady or the young man. So for their own sovereignty, I advise them to be very cautious and be very mindful about how and when they choose to have sex. I don't think casual sex does our culture any good at all. And it is seen as something virtuous to have a lot of sex, but to me, it's just weakness. If you need to be orgasming all day, every day, or every time you go out, or every time you see a woman, you can't control yourself. You're no better than someone who has to have their heroin, or has to have their crack. The only difference is this world props it up and advertises it, so it makes you feel like a sense of pride. But I don't see it that way. And I make it very clear to my children that I don't see it that way.
John, did you have anything to add to that?
I would add consciousness. That there is. I'm less staunch than you on this, but I do think that there's a lack of consciousness, both from young men and women, about sex, right? And it's easy to fall into a pleasure, or a sensuality or a hit. You are getting a hit of dopamine and serotonin and all those things. and to come at it with no consciousness. Like, what are the ripple effects of this? What's this? Am I ready for this? Is she ready for this? Right? And really taking responsibility and thinking through consciously what sex is going to do. That's a tough one for kids because they're pretty hopped up on hormones. But at least the intention. Like, if I would tell my son, if I had a son, I would say, hey, like, what's your intention? Is your intention to elevate this girl, or is it your intention to just use her?
Right.
And I think that that's a really important thing for them to know, that they can set the intention any way they want, you know, and giving them the option of a noble possibility. I think a lot of young men will take that.
Yeah. Do you see that a lot with, you know, we've talked a little bit about lost men, and, you know, you kind of touched on being a almost like an internet father figure, right? You have a lot of guys that are younger that are following you on YouTube, and that you have a lot of guys that come to your workshops, and you have, you know, men that you're helping to employ through the Second You Foundation. Do you see a lot of men searching for a father figure, searching for that father energy? Because it seems to be, when I look at like the meteoric rise of someone like Jordan Peterson, as we were talking about backstage, he just seems to personify this ordered, strict, assertive, boundaried male figure, you know, like that father figure that so many guys were missing, so many maybe women were missing as well. And that's like the people that really are hungry for that are like out there scrambling for it. So what's your take on that? Where do you see that showing up?
America is hungry for it. And that's why we have Donald Trump as president. He's a patriarch. He's an alpha male. He's a leader. He'll get a second term, there's no question about it, because people are hungry for that alpha male, strong leadership.
I don't want to get too deep into politics, but from a father figure perspective, do you think that he embodies the real qualities that we look for in a father?
You know, the only reason why I can see him is because he reminds me of my father. When I hear him speak, I see the things that he does, you know, the righteous things. My father's made mistakes also. I see my father, and I know how good it was. Even though I hated him, like a lot of Americans hate Donald Trump, it wasn't until I grew up and realized, damn, I needed that check. I needed that discipline. I needed someone that I disagreed with, that didn't care that I disagreed with him, and did what he thought was right anyway. I hated it, but as a grown man with children of my own now I get it.
I think that a lot of men that I encounter are hungry for strong, noble, masculine, spiritual to some degree, I think as well. I would put that in there. Depth. I think men today are even though they're number than ever and sort of more addicted to comfort than ever, I think there's something in the men that at least I meet, they come to me, where they're craving depth. They're craving depth, they're craving structure, they're craving, you know, to do something, to have a new possibility as men, because we're really at a unique moment in history where the paradigm of, I would call it masculine leadership, is really at a crucible, and men are aware of that. And I think they want to do, a lot of the guys that I come across want to do a better job and want to deepen.
Where do you see someone like Jordan Peterson fitting into the mix, or even someone, I know the controversial conversation about Trump, but where do you see that fitting in? Because I'm a Canadian, so I have like the outsider perspective, which is always interesting.
Pimping your Canadian intellectuals on us. Jordan Peterson, right? He is boundaried, and I think what, you know, part of what makes him, even to my daughter, I said, like, she really respected that he held to his guns. This is what I believe. And I think that there is so much kind of wishy-washiness, both in the political spectrum and in the social spectrum, and men are just kind of flowy in a lot of ways. And I think that someone who can make a stand and stand his ground is really respected. And I think people are hungry for that, men and women.
Yeah, you know, just to leave all the people that are watching this with maybe something tangible. What's the one skill, what's the one quality that you would encourage fathers to cultivate, whether they're going to become fathers, whether they are fathers already, whether their kids are old? What's like the one thing that you would encourage them to cultivate, to invest in?
For example, my son's a jazz pianist. And with us speaking about quality of time, right? Not about the amount of time, it's about the time spent, right? It's not about what I think we should do, right? It's about me, just speaking on me and my son's relationship. Every time I see my son, I know for a fact, because I know what he loves, I know what his passions are, I'm gonna create routine. I'm gonna be that, every time you're around me, we're gonna do something that has to do with what you love. But we're gonna experience that together and share that together every time we hang out. So I think routine is important when it comes to whatever your son or daughter's passions and love is for, whatever they enjoy doing.
Amazing.
Yeah, I love that. I think routine's so important, and I think that as fathers or businessmen or just men in general, this idea of bringing an intention, a powerful intention to every moment, is crucial. So we have the capacity to control our intention and the quality of our energy. And if you only have an hour or 2 hours, most fathers are working or doing something, right? Create a really powerful intention and take responsibility for your energy. Move your body, do what you got to do so that you show up, your heart's relaxed, your mind is focused, they can feel your love, they can feel your consciousness, and set a powerful intention for the time you do have, for putting them to bed. If your intention is, I'm gonna blast them with love and like make them feel like the happiest, most taken care of kid for the 20 minutes I get to see them today, they'll remember that, and that'll imprint, I believe, in their nervous systems and in their hearts.
Nice. Elliott?
I say it starts with being the strongest version of ourselves first, knowing our vision. I think a father or a man without a vision is a lost man. Being very clear on your values and living it. So being the example rather than having to speak it all the time,
Yeah, that's good. It's great, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your stories, talking about some of the challenges that you see men facing, questioning some of the rules around fatherhood, and just being able to give some insight into what the modern father or the fathers before us have been facing and the sort of culture in or around that. So I appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your insights. So
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
right
very
on.
much.
Right on.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, brother. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Right on.